I am Teresa Mateus, born in Bogota, Colombia, raised in New Jersey, and doing healing work right now in Harlem. I was trained as a clinical social worker, also got my bachelor's degree in literature and creative writing, which is where my sort of professional writing career, I think, started. And do a mix of integrating creative expression and arts and healing together. So when did I start writing on paper? When did I start writing in my head? Because those are two very different things, but I would say before I could write on paper, I was telling stories in my head. I would watch cartoons as a little girl, and when I didn't like where the plot line was going or I thought it was missing something, I would stay up at night and I would rewrite the story in my head, all of the dialogue and all of the scenes. I was just waiting for the moment where I could learn how to write letters, how to put it on paper. The second I could, I was writing stories on those big scratch sheets of early writing paper with the dotted lines. Short stories already by the time I wrote my first sets of words. My inspiration for writing is life. It's the world. It's every encounter I have with any human being. It's interesting because when I became a trauma therapist, people would always say, how do you remember everything that happened in a session or with your client? And I would say, it's all a story, you know? And so even at a little age, I paid attention to little things around me. In many ways, people would think I was really inside my head all the time, but honestly, I was just paying attention to every little detail about the world around me so that I could build the story out of it. And so for me, everything from how the light catches in the morning, how the sun sets at night, the look of stars, somebody's conversation I overhear on the train or across the street, the way that somebody talks, their accent, their inflection, the mannerisms that people have that are so different to every human being, like a fingerprint. Every little piece of the world to me is a story waiting to happen. You just have to find the angle to tell that story. I have a few things that I would advise writers. One, kind of builds on the answer to the last question, is pay attention to the world. Pay attention to what's going on around you, because there are stories waiting for you to find and waiting for your personal voice, your personal angle, your lived experience to tell it in a specific way. We could all be on the street hearing the same conversation and have 100 different ways to tell that story based on our own lived experience or what happened to us that day or what we're excited or passionate about. So listening to what's happening in the world, listening to what's happening in your own mind and imagination. Sometimes I'll have a really great dream and that will be the beginning of a story or the middle of a dialogue. So paying attention to everything, not being afraid to take risks. So be experimental, be a risk taker, do things maybe that you haven't seen done before. Just test out new ways of expressing yourself and don't be afraid to kind of walk along those edges. And never stop practicing. So writing is a practice, storytelling is a practice, so find your own rhythm, but make sure that you continue to be writing, even if it's just for yourself. Maybe it's in a journal to start before you feel comfortable sharing something with the world, but use your words as often as possible and express that muscle of practicing words, literature, writing, reading. Don't forget to read and absorb other people's stories, because these can be inspirations as well. This is an excerpt from my newest book, which is a work in progress, meaning not yet completed, but I wanted to share a little piece of it. It's called The Path of the Puma and the Hummingbird, and I consider this story to be a bit of magical adventure. Pachamama looked around at her creation on that day with both pride and sorrow, joy and grief, always feeling the tug between what was being birthed and what was dying away in any given moment. On this day, although, she didn't count in days or years, but in moon and sunrises. In seasons of life, becoming and unbecoming, she felt a stirring in her belly. She had always kept time with the number of beloveds in her stars, her beautiful constellations of souls, keeping track of each one as it descended to earth for a season of moons and suns and returned again to the sky once their season was done. In this moment, she felt becoming and unbecoming of great meaning on her horizon. Deep in the soil of her earth, she felt memory coming to life, her many creatures waking up with a new alertedness. They felt it too. It had been many moons and suns since she had been remembered well across the vastness of her earth. So many of her beloveds had violated and abused her roots and vines, so many of her creatures and lands gone from the earthly plane due to the terrorism of her being. Many more of her once earthbound beloveds were counted among the stars, so many plants and creatures, so many. But in this moon cycle, something was becoming. No, two somethings. One of great heaviness, the hucha of this heaviness so clouded that if she had lungs, she would have choked on it. But another of something else, some potential stirring in this other, something that could change the waira, the winds of what was to come. Pachamama breathed into the winds, pushing her breath through the strands of the rooted plants of her creation. She shook through the limbs and roots of her creations. She churned her wakeful energy into her creatures, seen and unseen, those ancient ones that had been forgotten, but would soon be called upon again. It was nearly time for a new season. How she loved the turning of a new cycle, the potential, like the scent of munya and its fresh minted flavor crisp in the air. As always, she didn't know how these beloveds, these conflicted and complex beings would carry forward this story of life, of journey, of Aini. But that was not for her to will or determine. Reciprocity would come as it always did to bring balance to all things. How it would come to be, she would wait and listen and be present, listening to see if she were called to, if she were remembered, if she were needed. She loved all her being so dearly. She would be here as a mama to all her creation, beyond all, for always. In that moment, she remembered a song that one of her beloveds in the Karo tribe had written for her many, many moons before. She remembered this beloved and wept from joy as the sound of the song echoed in the wind and the story of her beloveds in this age stirred to life. She wept from joy and hope and possibility, and the rains came down onto the mountains. In between the raindrops, as the rumble of thunder offered a drumming rhythm, the faint whisper on the waira could be heard, Humpwe, Humpwe, Humpwe.